Thank you, Tiffany. And yeah, BioPortal. This is something that I'm sure everyone who's familiar with ontologies and especially biological and biomedical ontologies may have some familiarity with, as it has been around for a while at this point. But if you're not familiar, I encourage you to go check it out. The URL is right there. And in short, this is a what we call a comprehensive repository of biological and biomedical ontologies. There was a paper on this in NAR back in 2011, and I'll get into the history shortly. But we recently had another NAR paper to update the community with what this resource looks like these days. So feel free to check out either or both of those. But much of what I will talk about in this talk is featured in that more recent NAR paper. Not all of it, though. But I'll back up a second and talk about how we actually feel a collection of ontologies is a worthwhile thing to have in the first place. I think this is something that is easy to take for granted when, okay, I can just hop on GitHub or elsewhere on the internet and download my favorite ontology. But in practice, I believe that ontologies are absolutely essential to collecting, learning from, and sharing biological and biomedical data. So what BioPortal does is allow researchers and the broader community to do some of the basics in that process, like searching and finding ontologies relevant to your needs. If you're just starting with the name of something like gramicidin here, well, right away you can realize, okay, well, that's in the ATC classification, it's in RX norm, it's in NCIT, and each of those ontologies are going to have slightly different representations and philosophies behind what that means to them. By the same token, you can browse ontologies by their relationships. In this case, maybe you're looking at gramicidin S, or in terms of its CheBI entry. Right away, you can browse and say, okay, well, that's a subclass of another CheBI term. But you can also look at it through multiple ontologies and their mappings to each other and realize, okay, well, there's actually a same as relationship defining that to a term in NCIT. And again, might not mean exactly the same thing, but at least you can see what's there. Of course, with a resource like BioPortal, you can also map the terms between ontologies more broadly. In this case, we see, okay, well, that ATC term for gramicidin maps to one in MESH, and actually more than one in SNOMED CT. So depending upon your needs, maybe one is more appropriate than the other. You can also compare different versions of an ontology and its use cases. Now, CheBI is certainly a very well-established resource and ontology. We have different submissions or versions of that on BioPortal going back to at least 2008, and defined use cases of that in multiple resources, including Cellosaurus, PubChem, and others. But what I do want to focus on is how BioPortal differs from other ontology resources that are out there. It is intended to be a comprehensive collection with very few limitations on inclusion of new ontologies. And it does include all the ontologies that you'll find in OPO Foundry, most of the ontologies vocabularies that are currently in UMLS, which is a pretty unique thing to have due to some very specific arrangements that BioPortal has with the NLM. And like OLS, it provides an interface to browse ontology classes. However, unlike some of the other browser interfaces that are primarily interested in providing metadata, BioPortal actually has the ontology files. We store them ourselves, including the previous version, so you can download them in a variety of formats without necessarily having to worry about whether their original resources is still available or not. It also supports private ontologies, so if you don't feel like sharing, or you are you're not just ready to share the ontology with the community, well, that's an option as well. It has tools baked in for term annotation and ontology recommendations. Again, these are very important to being able to search ontologies and find the term that you're looking for in the context that you're looking for. But then more recently, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Loom lexical mappings that are also present in BioPortal and map terms across those ontologies. But I'll also talk about some of the more recent ways in which we've made BioPortal a unique resource, including semi-automated change requests with this thing called KGCL, or the Knowledge Graph Change Language. So as of quite recently on BioPortal, we know that it's visited more than 100,000 times every month and has more than 159 API calls. That's a lot of visits, but it makes sense because there are a large number of ontologies on here. There's more than 1,200 public ontologies with more than 17,000 classes. I'm sure those numbers have probably increased even just in the past few days, as there are new ontologies being added all the time, including individual views of their ontologies. So, for example, if you have an organism-specific SLIM of Go, there may in fact be a separate view for that on BioPortal. But as I mentioned, a number of ontologies are added frequently, including those listed here, like the behavior change intervention ontology. So as for the history and why you may already be familiar with BioPortal, and that's because it has recently celebrated its 20th birthday, at least as a project. The original underlying group responsible for this project started back in 2005, but since then it's added hundreds of ontologies. The API wasn't actually released until 2013, but from there it was kind of an upward track. This is surprising considering that for much of that history, BioPortal did not have consistent funding. It's only until 2021 that it got consistent project funding again. So much of this was just kind of limping along, to be honest. But that is often how these projects go. As we heard at the keynote yesterday, sometimes it is in fact kind of a labor of love, but it helps when you have the funding too. So let's get to what is actually new in BioPortal. I mentioned this knowledge graph change language, but we've also added some new ways to access that BioPortal API, including with AI agents, as we heard a lot about earlier, as well as BioPortal ontologies rendered as knowledge graphs. And that gets into this idea of, okay, what really is a knowledge graph, and is an ontology just something that we can use as a graph that we combine with other knowledge sources? So KGCL, or the Knowledge Graph Change Language, actually has its own paper. It's linked there below. But in brief, this is a data model for representing the kinds of changes that you'd see in ontologies and knowledge graphs. And you may be wondering, okay, wait a second, I thought this was BioPortal was an ontology resource. Why are you talking about something that changes knowledge graphs? And part of the reason here is that this is more of a general framework for describing changes in hierarchical or relation-based knowledge in general. There are certainly technical ways to describe the changes that may happen in data, but when you're dealing with resources that don't all necessarily share the same format or even the same modeling, you want an easy way to describe both the kind of the human level changes, or the human understandable changes, and the literal technical changes that are happening between those relations. So in KGCL, this means we have a hierarchy of change types. This is just part of the hierarchy. And you can say things like, okay, I want to rename a node. You can express that in natural language as well, and say, okay, I'm going to rename this specific ENVO term from wax to oil. So directly human readable. And then you can also serialize it as well in your favorite serialization. We'll usually choose YAML, again, because it's quite readable. But for whatever works for your system, you could use a different serialization. So in BioPortal, this means that if you set up a change agent for a given ontology, so this is already implemented in ENVO, Cell Ontology, Mondo, and others. And this is specifically through something called Ontobot, or the Ontobot change agent. Then it'll be able to check for issues and parse that KGCL into something actionable. And in BioPortal, that means if you navigate to a specific ontology, like one of these, and look at a specific class or term, then there will be a button on the upper right that says Add a Proposal. And from there, you can suggest a change that will be translated into KGCL and eventually end up on the corresponding GitHub repository, courtesy of that Ontobot change agent. So in this case, it looks like Chris has navigated into Mondo and asked to obsolete the term primary cerebellar cerebellar degeneration. So in this case, it gets translated into KGCL. The change agent creates the issue, and from that point, a human curator or an AI agent could follow up on that and make the actual change. But most importantly, these are all standardized, so you know exactly what kind of changes need to happen. So on the API front, I should mention that about actually more than 100 applications call the BioPortal API. It has extensive documentation, and you do not have to access it directly. There are Python applications that are now capable of wrapping this API and exposing most of its functions. Those include the OntoPortal client and OAK, or the Ontology Access Kit, which has a whole implementation dedicated to BioPortal. And I added some demonstration code here. For example, you can use OAK's annotate function to take something like, okay, Liverpool is a port city, instructed to use BioPortal as the source, and then you'll get a set of annotations with you could specify your ontology, but in this case it got a place name, so it's going to look at the gazetteer and get things like place name. Of course, that's just a subset of the list, because it'll also try to annotate things like port, maybe to what you want and maybe not. More recently, we can refine some of the results we get from that using AI agents. And one way those are especially useful is with these MCPs, or model context protocols, that are essentially acting to translate these APIs into tools that agents can use. So if you use the BioPortal MCP with your favorite AI client, in this case I used Goose Desktop with a Llama 4 model, and I asked it, okay, use the BioPortal MCP specifically. When you search for Liverpool, but I then return any terms that look like they're names of bacterial species. So I can provide that kind of free text, extra context, even though on its face that doesn't sound like a sensible query. I do actually get some search results, because I already knew they were there in SNOMED CT and RCD right out of BioPortal. And I believe those were actually clickable links. That's the kind of key, is you want to be able to link back to the BioPortal references as well. I know this is also in NCBI Taxon as well. So if prompted, I'm sure that would also return the taxon result. So that's the other important thing about these MCPs and operating with these agents, is you can follow up on that conversation as well and refine it. So we've been talking about ontologies as knowledge graphs. And one way this becomes very useful is when we're combining multiple ontologies and making use of both their internal hierarchies and the mappings between them. So for example, if we're starting with, and all of these are ontologies that are in BioPortal, we start with food on, and we say, okay, I want to know something about grapefruit's interaction with drugs. So I can start with the relevant terms in food on for grapefruit. I can look at FIDEO, the food interactions with drugs evidence ontology, and realize, okay, well, one of the interactions is there between grapefruit and this drug dronedarone. I can map that to the corresponding KEBI term, and then its corresponding RX norm term to get different names and labels of that drug. And then I can go even further into things like the toxic process ontology and realize, okay, well, there are specific processes that are mapped through here. So in practice, we may not want to do all that by hand. We want to be able to automate that. So that's exactly what KG BioPortal will do. So this is a set of code that will translate ontologies into standardized knowledge graphs in the KGX format. Many of these are already pre-built, but in practice, what you can use this for is to build your own knowledge graphs out of those BioPortal ontologies and merge them in the way that you prefer, as opposed to trying to download all of them or individual ones and then work with them. So there's a lot of next steps for BioPortal as an active community resource, including more support for LLMs and agents, support for more of these artifacts beyond ontologies, like storing entire knowledge graphs, as well as metadata that would support greater interoperability and internationalization, more mappings, and integration with its parent OntoPortal Alliance. So with that, I'll certainly thank my group that Chris Mungle leads at the Berkeley Lab, as well as the original founders of BioPortal at Stanford, including Mark Muson's group. So thanks for your attention.
Any questions? Oh, sorry.
Thanks a lot, Harry. Great talk. I was wondering about KGCL, so I'm discovering it looks great. I'm wondering, you were showing that from a request in BioPortal, you could generate an issue in GitHub. Is there any way this could be pushed up to the point where you generate a PR from that?
Yes, I don't think it's currently configured to do that because much of the effort happens through GitHub Actions. That could just be a few extra lines on a GitHub action to create a PR from it. I mean, in practice, I think we're increasingly at the point where you can kind of AI-ify that as well and determine, okay, well, this is a PR that may require a little bit extra discussion. This is a PR that may, maybe we can just propose directly. But yes, in practice, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Any other?
Yeah, so just to follow up on that question, on some repositories, I'm not sure how many of them, but on some repositories, such as, for example, Uberon, it is in fact configured to automatically create a PR based on the KGCL request. And so the actual curator, human curator behind the ontology just has to validate the PR if the request is found to be acceptable.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Damien.
Any other questions?
Hello, so thank you for the talk. Sometimes I feel quite overwhelmed by the number of ontologies, and like, well, which kind of ontology should I use for my project? So, do you have any guidelines to? So, there's part of the solution is the graph that you presented before, but maybe I don't know a set of criteria depending on my context, and also so it's deemed to be comprehensive, but do you have means to evaluate the quality of new ontologies that have been added? Because maybe some are really redundant with already existing ontologies.
Yeah, no, those are fantastic questions. The question of kind of evaluating quality is one that we keep coming back to, and elsewhere in the OntoPortal ontology, I know there are additional metrics that are used at least to provide users with a bit more context on whether an ontology is appropriate for what they're using. Like in AgroPortal in particular, I know there's a whole set. That's one thing that I think is going to happen in the near term, is that we adopt more of those metrics along the lines of what AgroPortal uses. But we've also been talking about instituting just kind of general statistics like, okay, when was this last updated? Many of them are the kind of things that have existed in OboFoundry for a while. I doubt that we're going to institute them quite as strictly as OboPortal, as OboFoundry will display them. But yeah, that's certainly something that we're very interested in, is providing those additional metrics. Yeah, and that's I can imagine in some cases that may include kind of like similarity. There are cases where BioPortal does directly display instances where a where an ontology is essentially like a derivative of another. Definitely in cases where it's a view, that's often a user created thing. But yeah, in some cases where there's a very clear line of delineation between the two, that is displayed. But honestly, that's something that that may end up in the knowledge graph representations as well, because that's a case where often we can much more clearly define similarity between ontologies at the semantic level, rather than just, okay, well, these share a lot of the same imports. In practice, we could say, okay, well, these actually share a lot of the same kinds of terms, so maybe they're related at that level as well. And I think that could be useful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give Harry a hand.